Why, hello, ladies and gentlemen. On today's show, the first show of 2022, and it's not what you would expect it to be about. It's about a little bit of an underrated player. Dare I say, a player who is still undervalued by baseball fans. That is Jake Cronenworth, doing a podcast all about him, his origin story with our Padres, and how he came to be the GOAT, the Rake Cronenworth that we know him to be. And again, whether or not he's still underrated. All of that and more, guys, on today's Locked On Padres. You know what it is. Here we go.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Wednesday, January 5th. As always, I am your host, with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You might be familiar with some of my baseball-related work at places like Baseball FYI, Friars on Base, Off the Bench Baseball, or Just Baseball, to which I am a staff writer for. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiiipeno, or at LO_Padres, the Twitter account for the show, where there's all sorts of good memes and just good vibes about exclusively Padres content. You know what I'm saying, guys? As always, thank you for making Locked On Padres your hashtag first listen every day. We are free and available platforms. Maybe today it wasn't your first listen, because it's been a while, ladies and gentlemen. Happy 2022. It's been a while since I've done a podcast, for sure, especially because the last few episodes I recorded like a week before they came out. So I have not been on the mic in a little bit. It feels actually really fun. So I'm excited to do this. And today we are going to be talking about Jake Cronenworth. That's right. You might have heard of it before if you're a Padres fan. And I want to ask the question, is he still underrated? Is Jake Cronenworth... Now, don't get me wrong. I know I'm doing the cliche that every podcast person, every content creator does when they're covering a specific team, where they say, this person's underrated. He's still he was a snub. He was that. I know it's a cliche, but I actually do think that there's a lot that I have to say about this. And we're going to be talking about some things that I actually wrote about him back in 2020. We're going to be talking about the future of him, how he came to go to the team, and all that stuff. It's just an all Jake Cronenworth love pod, I think. Pretty good way to start off 2022, if I do say so myself, guys. So let's get into it. Why don't we? Let's get into it. Let's start first, guys, with talking about Jake Cronenworth. For those who are unfamiliar, just kind of how he came to be on the Padres roster. And that's what's so funny about this journey with Mr. Ray Cronenworth, is that it starts with Jorge Mateo. Spring training, I still look back in a weird way back when the world first ended, beginning of 2020. What was it, back in February, March, or whatever, when everything gets shut down, baseball doesn't have anything going on for a while, and then finally you have the spring training stuff. And then what ends up happening is that Jorge Mateo tests positive for COVID-19. Remember, this was at the very beginning of it. No vaccines, the protocols weren't out. It was just like, you're out. Like that was kind of the thing. Like, you're out for a while. And that's what ended up happening. That's what happened with Jorge Mateo, who, a decent player for what he's, for what it's worth, but he never amounted to be too much of a big thing. But he was probably going to be the guy that the Padres brought to be part of their opening day roster, if not for testing positive. And that isn't a move that was like a dumb move, by the way. This isn't like a situation where they were the Padres brass and management. They were relieved. It's like, okay, universal forces that be, or what have you, not to make light of the situation. They just said, you know what, you guys are making a mistake. You got to bring Cronenworth. At the time, the Padres' biggest concern was outfield depth. They had just brought in Tommy Pham via trade, and he was like, at the time being viewed as a guy who would give on-base power for the Padres and what have you. But then you had Trent Grisham, who you also just acquired in a trade, and then you had Myers. And then after that, it was kind of like, oh, God, Jurickson Profar? Like, is that it for our outfield depth? Because they had just traded Manny Margot for Emilio Pagan. So they decide, decent outfielder, lots of speed. Maybe he can get better with the bat. Makes a lot of sense. And instead, Jake Cronenworth ends up being the guy for the Padres. And in his first season, granted in the truncated 2020 season, everybody knows he was phenomenal, batting with a slash line of 285, 354, 477 with a grand spanking total of, if I could bring it up right now next to me, how many home runs did he have? And with a grand spanking total of 4 home runs. So not a lot of power from Jake Cronenworth, but the biggest thing about him, of course, was his versatility, was his defense, his big hits when they mattered too. I still remember, like, seeing Cronenworth. It was one of his first games in 2020, and he had to play first base because people forget, Eric almost messed up there, guys. It's the new year. Sorry, I almost broke the podcast. But the usual guy who plays first base for the Padres was actually injured, and he actually been playing well at the time. So everyone was like, "Oh, great!" So the one time this guy's gonna play well for us, and he gets hurt. You know what I mean? So everybody was a little bit annoyed by that. So they have to move Jake Cronenworth over to first base, and I remember hearing Mr. Don Orsillo, God by Cronenworth, like at first base. I swear he must have had like 18 defensive runs saved in just like those first 2 games that he played first base. It was incredible. And it's funny because originally he was slated to be a shortstop, and then he ends up becoming the second baseman, of course. But like that's what we were expecting. And Tatis was awesome that year at defense, so that was really cool. And then you had Cronenworth there, so you got like a little bit of a glimpse into Cronenworth's just unbelievable ability to play every position. He hasn't had to play third base a lot because, as I've mentioned on this podcast plenty of times, Manny Machado does not miss time. In fact, he's the third, the top 5 players. He's in the third. I think he's the third since 2018 or 2017 with total amount of games played. So he plays every game. So you never have really had to see Jake Cronenworth play third base. I think the only time he has was in a blowout game against the Arizona Diamondbacks a while back, when they just had to, they said, all right, let's just get him some reps over here. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on that though, or maybe it was Ty France. I don't know. But that's how it all starts. That's what's so funny is that is how the whole thing starts for the team. And then you compare to my other second baseman that year, he was one of the best. He really was. And it's just, I don't know, man. I'm just getting happy talking about this guy. If you brought up his StatCast profile, everything in the red, he hit the ball hard. He did not whiff on pitches, and he did not strike out too much. He really didn't. This was a tough at-bat. Sure, there would be times when you'd be like, damn, like this guy isn't hitting for enough power. Only 4 home runs in those 60 games. Definitely not a lot of pop in his bat, but he was just hitting line drives. He was spraying the ball across multiple parts of the field, which was really, really important. And it made you wonder, like, how legit was this? And exactly how good was it? Like, it was, there's one thing for a guy to just come out of the blue and be good, but exactly how good was he? And if you look at, what I wrote back around this time, all right, I'm just going to pull up my article. I wrote for Fanside at Friars on Base, their Padres blog, which I no longer write for because I write for Just Baseball. I wrote an article just kind of talking about, is Jake Cronenworth the next Ben Zobrist? And it wasn't my best article in the world. I know some nerds would read that and be like, look, these all the, you didn't bring up enough stats and all that stuff. And I brought up his slash lines and the fact that he's played multiple positions. And that's really what I was kind of trying to key in on, is the fact that he did not have a similar swing and all that. He did not have nearly as many on base, I think, skills as Ben Zobrist did. His first full season with the Rays, he had a 400 on base percentage, although it did take him a few years before he was full time for them. But Cronenworth, it was just in the sense of those guys that you bring up. The Rays had Evan Longoria. We had Fernando Tatis Jr. and Manny Machado. They had some other players too, don't get me wrong. But for the Padres, it was like you need that guy who's just the random prospect that just breaks out. He doesn't have to be a superstar. Although you could make some arguments that Jake Cronenworth has been like right under superstar level, and just comes out of nowhere and is able to give you the bread and butter. And that's what Jake Cronenworth was. That's what he was. But the question is, as I raised at the beginning, is how underrated is he? Is he still underrated? And how does he stack up to other second basemen in the rest of baseball? Well, that's the question now, isn't it, guys? But before we answer that question, ladies and gentlemen, let me take you just 1 second. Let me just take 1 second, okay, to talk about the best protein bars in all the land, guys. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, I know mine sure is. If you guys can tell, if you're watching the YouTube, Locked On Padres on YouTube, you can see I'm a little bit of a chunky boy. Make sure you include Built Bar in your plan, guys. It's a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar and maybe even better than a candy bar. That's right, guys. And what I love about them the most, great variety of flavors. Cherry Barcia, it was Mama Reyes' birthday yesterday. I got her a pack of Built Bars. And I got her favorite. That's her favorite, Cherry Barcia. I love apple almond crisp. And then you've got coconut. You've got coconut almond, chocolate, German chocolate, double chocolate, cookies and cream. A favorite of the Locked On crew is coconut brownie chunk. That one's delicious. They're awesome, guys. And check out the kind of breakdown of everything. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and just a dozen net carbs. I mean, man, like it's a big improvement. And then, so here's an idea, guys. Go with Built Bar, guys. And because you're listening to this podcast, if you go to Built.com, you can use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Remember, that is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Once again, everybody, thank you for making Locked On #first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Again, maybe it wasn't your first listen of the day. I get it. Look, I've been stumbling a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you want from me? Let's see here. What should I say? Let me just throw out the stat. This tweet actually went semi-viral on Padres Twitter, and I posted it back on December 7th, and it is the second baseman F4 leaders since the beginning of 2020. F4 standing for Fangraphs WAR. Fangraphs wins above replacement. It's important to say F4 because Baseball Reference does a different one, but Fangraphs is commonly, I think, assumed to be one that's a little bit more accurate, at least by people that I trust with statistics and whatnot. First, Marcus Semien, 7.8. Second, Brandon Lau of the Rays, another underrated player. And then number 3, Jake Cronenworth with a 5.9 F-WAR since the beginning of 2020. Then Jose Altuve at number 4. That's right, above Jose Altuve, 5.3. And then DJ LeMahieu, 4.9. Now, don't get me wrong. It was a truncated 2020, but it is worth pointing out that basically since we've been watching baseball for a long time, since I've been doing this podcast, Jake Cronenworth has been a top 5 second baseman in baseball, and I stand by that. I do. Now, does that necessarily mean that I want him over every second baseman? Not necessarily. I'm just saying what he's been like, okay? Because there's so many variables to this. For example, Ozzie Albies, second baseman over at the championship-winning Atlanta Braves. Everybody go check out Locked On Braves. Jake Mastriana does a great job covering the champs. You might be saying, he's better than Albies. Well, right now, yeah. But it also has to be brought up that Jake Cronenworth is definitely a little bit older. It is possible that this is the best it's going to get, which is still really great, don't get me wrong. But Ozzie Albies is still younger, a better base runner than Jake Cronenworth, that much I know. And maybe has a little bit more power potential than Jake Cronenworth. He is still just 24 years old, and I think that the hype is still there. Don't get me wrong, though. He has been better. And that raises the question. And like I said at the top of the podcast, every podcaster, every content creator, every journalist, every beat writer, everyone always loves talking about how their player is the best and this and that because that gets you the clicks. You know what I'm saying? I already know that, like, if I go out here and say something, you know, if I say Manny Machado is the GOAT of third baseman in the league and you're an idiot for thinking otherwise, that the Padres fans will love that and you eat it up because people love to root for their team. But I really do believe that Jake Cronenworth is still a little bit underrated. But there is reason for that. And I think the biggest reason is because he's playing next to, oftentimes directly next to, the most popular player in like baseball, with the exception of Shohei Ohtani and El Nino, Fernando Tatis Jr. So I think that that's the biggest reason. So I think that people should be forgiven a little bit for underrated Jake Cronenworth. But Jake Cronenworth's so good and has been so effective, especially when he plays first base, that we've seen before, that a lot of people want the Padres to dump our current first baseman. That way the infield can look at like some combination of Manny Machado, Ha-Seong Kim / Fernando Tatis Jr., and then Ha-Seong Kim / Fernando Tatis Jr., I should say. Maybe C.J. Abrams, depending on when he debuts. And then over at first base, Jake Cronenworth, because he has shown that he is an excellent defender who can play all around. I mean, the catches that he's made, the scoops at first base, the diving plays. He's made some incredible plays. And that's what I like about him. And I love his energy, too. That's another thing. You would think, okay, let me guess. This dude from Michigan, this white dude from Michigan that nobody ever heard about, you know, heading into see. All right, let me guess. Is he just kind of normal? And does he have like a? This is the first guy that came to mind. I don't know him personally, obviously, but like a Cooper Kupp. Like he's just there. It's business. We're having fun, doing our thing, but we're not like, you know, being an electric personality per se. Shout out Cooper Kupp, by the way, won my fantasy championship. Suck it, my league. The feds tried to take me out. They try to take me out. They try to add more teams to the playoffs at the last second so they could eliminate me and take away my bye week. True story. But I still won. So, but anyway, he's not like that though. When you watch Jake Cronenworth play, he's so exciting. I still remember back before the Padres, fell apart in 2021, the double play that was turned to end the game and end up sweeping the Dodgers. Don't get me wrong, that obviously this ended up going horribly, but at the time the Padres were one of the best teams. They play the Dodgers even if they had a couple injuries, and they sweep them, and Cronenworth's like, yeah, like he's just losing his mind. You see him on the bench doing the, if you guys are watching me on YouTube, doing the chop or whatever the dance move is that's become a really funny gif now. Like, he does have a lot of personality, a lot of intensity when playing, so it's just, there's a lot of wonder, like, what the heck, man? Why is it everybody like losing their mind? This guy was part of the Slam Diego thing when they had all those grand slams in a row, and he's just cheering and going nuts. It is a little weird when you think about it that way. And I think it's just because it's been a little bit of time, and I think in fairness, people are wondering how legit is it. I mean, I just read you those WAR numbers, and in this year, Cronenworth did fall off a little bit at one point, I should say, but by fall off, I mean like I mean fall off in the most tame of descriptions. You know what I'm saying? Like, he just didn't have like a monster kind of second half Jake Cronenworth. I'm just going to pull up the stats really quickly. This past season, when you look at kind of July, 247, 320, 452, that's not terrible, but it's not great. And then same thing for the next month, 247, 342, and then September, 234, 306, and then October, 250, 231 in terms of batting average and on base percentage. Although the October thing, take out the October stats, it was only 3 games, but like, you kind of get where I'm going with. While the beginning of the season, this guy was an absolute monster, but it happens sometimes. But overall, though, what I liked is he showed a lot more power. This year, he had 21 home runs to make up for that. It's like, all right, so maybe he isn't like Adam Frazier. Adam Frazier, who just has no types of power and just got traded back to Seattle. That guy doesn't have any power upside, and I thought that that's what might happen with Cronenworth this year. I was wrong about that. Jake Cronenworth has a lot more power in his bat than we give him credit for. He's able to hit line drives, obviously, and he's able to hit those singles that you need and get a decent on base. He does not whiff at pitches at all. He's among the top in baseball in that sort of area, and also he hits for a decent amount of power. I mean, this is a guy who hit for a cycle this year. So Jake Cronenworth really just is, he's... Can I call him the Warlock now? I don't know. I haven't come up with a new nickname. Ever since Tommy Pham kind of started off this podcast when I called him a Warlock, ever since he kind of didn't live up to that, I've been wondering whether or not I could trade that to somebody else. I'm not really entirely sure. But yeah, like, I wrote about it in my article at Fansided. I basically said, the greatest point here to make isn't about their statistics, but their stories. Like Cronenworth, Zobrist rise to prominence was hardly something that could have been predicted. Both were average, middling prospects, even by their mid-20s, and for teams that had more recognizable superstars already on tap. But they're necessary utility men that every team with championship aspirations gleefully appreciates when they, albeit rarely, come along. That's kind of how I feel about him. And I think that a lot of people feel the same way. It was such a magical 2020 season, and he's here to stay. But now I want to end the podcast by really diving one more time, perhaps slandering a little bit, offering just a tiny bit of slander in terms of people who disrespect Jake Cronenworth, which there aren't many, but people who don't realize just, how good he is. You know what I'm saying? So before we get into that though, guys, let me talk to you for just a quick second about Bet Online, guys. BetOnline would like to wish you a new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. New year and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code LOCKEDON to get started. That's right, 50%, guys. Kicks ass. I know. It's pretty awesome. But from whether it's baseball, whether it's football, you got the playoffs coming up, basketball, hockey, UFC, whatever, they've got you they've got all these amazing offers available for you for 2022. Fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts. Woo! All right, guys. All right. It's been, I don't know, I've had fun talking about Jake Cronenworth. And it's hard to talk and to give his whole story in just one podcast. But I really feel like, and again, you guys can check out Fanside. I think I'm going to link it in the description below. It was written in 2020, and it was written very hastily, I might add. So don't get me wrong. he isn't necessarily Ben Zobrist. Ben Zobrist was good for years, so we don't know exactly how Jake Cronenworth is going to be. But let's talk in terms of the right now. And I think that what needs to be brought up in terms of the greatest case for why he's still underrated is the All-Star voting. And the All-Star voting this year, if people forgot, you are forgiven because it was absolute just it was malpractice. It was malpractice. And let me be clear, I said this at the very beginning. Everyone loves to say how, oh, my player was snubbed that I cover. Everybody likes to say, oh, Ketel Marte is the best outfielder out there, most underrated outfielder. Not to take shots at my boy Millard Thomas, but like everybody loves to do that. They love to talk about how their players got snubbed. It's easy engagement and what have you. Not to sound like a jerk or anything, but that's how it works. But I really did feel like this year was one of those where I was like, wait a minute, what? And here's why I say that. In terms of the National League, the original, and don't get me wrong, Jake Cronenworth did end up making the All-Star team when he got voted in afterwards, but the original voting was Ozzie Albies, Adam Frazier, and Gavin Lux. And that's just ridiculous. Now, here's the thing. I'm not one of those punks. I said this year. I was like, look, Chris Bryant, Nolan Arenado, no problem if you vote those guys. Do I think Manny Machado was a little bit better than Nolan Arenado at points this year? Yes. Do I think he was better than Chris Bryant? It depends. I think he was better as a defensive player, but Bryant did have a utility, and it was also just fun seeing Chris Bryant be back and that surge of that Cubs team in the first half. So I understood that. You know what I'm saying? I understand people being like, okay, I'll take those others. But for Adam Frazier and Gavin Lux, I actually somewhat understood Ozzie Albies. He was doing well. He was hitting for good power at the time. The Braves barely had anybody still alive, so I know the Braves fans were just like, this is our one dude. We got to have him in there. He's a super fun player. I kind of get that too. But then Adam Frazier, who had never hit for power in his life and had never really done anything, you look back and you say, wow, this doesn't age well whatsoever. And it definitely doesn't. But I will say at the time, he was leading the National League in hits. And also, let's give Pittsburgh something. You know what I'm saying? Like, I get it. They barely have anything to be happy about at the time. And it's like, I know they end up having Brian Reynolds have a great season, but we're just gonna vote our guy in. Like, I don't care. So that one a little bit less forgivable than Ozzie Albies, but still, like, I at least kind of get it because bottom line is he led the National League in hits. The one that didn't make sense was Gavin Lux. Are you guys kidding me right now? Gavin Lux. This is why we hate the Dodgers fans. Before anybody says like, oh, well, we'll vote for your player. It's like, bro, you got like more fans. Like, I get it. Like, cool. But like, I thought this was about choosing the best players. You know what I mean? Do we really want what happened that one year where the entire Kansas City Royals roster was on there with the exception of Mike Trout? Actually, don't answer that because that was actually hilarious at the time. Because look, if baseball wants to be ridiculous and sometimes just making it more ridiculous makes it more interesting and whatnot, I guess. But even still, that was a little bit out of control. And people voted Gavin Lux, who wasn't even slightly deserving. This guy wasn't better than DJ LeMahieu, and DJ LeMahieu had a down year last year. I know DJ LeMahieu's in the American League, but that's just like kind of a microcosm of how people don't realize really what Jake Cronenworth is doing. Is it because they don't believe it? I don't know. But the biggest thing for me is the guy's a beast, and you might be wondering, was it the defense? No, it wasn't the defense. In terms of defensive second baseman, he's up there in terms of out there in defensive runs saved, and on top of that, which I mentioned when I was talking about Gold Gloves back a few months ago, where I said, look, another thing about him is plays multiple positions. And I think that should count for something. Even if you don't play an incredible first base as much as you're incredible at second or whatever, I do think it counts for something to be like, well, the guy does both. And I think that means something because it means that your team knows that they don't have to go fishing out for another first baseman. It gives your team more depth. You're helping the team in more areas. Even if you're not as in a vacuum, a standout at one position, I do think that should be taken into account when talking about Gold Glove stuff. I think going to what's his face? What's that guy's name over at the Cardinals? Tommy Edman. I think it ends up going to Tommy Edman, who has like 87 defensive runs saved in 2 months or something like that. Like something crazy. Like he's great. The Cardinals had 5 Gold Glovers or 5 or 6 Gold Glovers, so I get it, but. In terms of that, he was better than Ozzie Albies, though. He was outs above average was higher. Outs above average was higher than basically every second baseman, especially at the time when the voting was happening. So, like, what was the issue here? It was popularity, and I had to get it. So with that, I really do think Jake Cronenworth is underrated. And as I alluded to in the fan-sided piece, just a tiny bit, is that, and I alluded to this before also in my tweet, where I said, especially taking into account his contract, simply cannot understate how huge of a find Cronenworth has been for the Padres. That's a big thing, especially with this team that currently has a payroll of something like $214 million, and they don't really have the ability, in theory, to go out and sign a big superstar caliber player. Like, if they didn't have Jake Cronenworth and they had a problem at second base because of Hassan Kim not panning out, Jurickson Profar not panning out, then you might be in a situation where you're like, oh no, they can't just go get Marcus Semien. You know what I'm saying? They can't just go do that. They can't get anybody. They can't get anybody to move him over to second base. But that would be a little bit more of an issue. But because of the contract, because of the fact that I'm going to look this up, I forgot to look this up before, but because of that, he becomes immeasurably more valuable, in a plethora of ways. Because now the Padres don't have to worry about that contract. And for amount of years do they have to worry? I forgot to look this up. Let's see here. Hold on. I typed in Jake Cronenworth. Can you believe that? I am a mess, ladies and gentlemen. So let me see here. Spot track. Let's see here. I just want to make sure. Yeah, so in 2022, he's going to be making, as of right now, luxury tax salary just says 575. So we're still in arbitration. Remember, we're in the MLB lockout right now, but he has arbitration period 1 for 2023, 2024, 2025, and becomes a unrestricted free agent in 2026. Think about how valuable that is. Think about that. You have your second baseman, and he can play other positions. And he's already good. He's Ben Zobrist, ladies and gentlemen, in a lot of ways. Maybe not necessarily as good, like I said, and maybe a little bit more power, though, than Ben Zobrist, I think, had. But in terms of the on-base stuff, no. But even still, that utility man, you need it. And this is why I think Padres Twitter, which granted isn't always the best reflection of what's actually going on with the team. It's just people maybe sometimes getting bored, which aren't we all. There was a moment when everyone was talking about trading Jake Cronenworth, which I thought was kind of asinine, in a lot of ways. Now, I think in some scenarios it would make sense, right? In some scenarios, trading Jake Cronenworth makes sense. And those scenarios involve your team being very, very, and you having to rebuild. I.e., if Jake Cronenworth was on the Pirates right now, you might be able to get like a boatload of prospects, maybe, because of the fact that he is on the books, or I should say, because you don't have to give him some massive contract. Who's on the open market right now? He's probably getting like what Chris Taylor got, if not more. Or wait, I'm sorry, not what Chris Taylor got, because Chris Taylor, I don't think he officially signed. He's expected to return to the Dodgers, but I imagine that deal is going to be around the 60, 70 million range. Jake Cronenworth might get even more than that. You know what I'm saying? Because he's good. Especially as an offensive player, although Chris Taylor is very, very good too. Make no mistake about that. I don't want to slander the man, even if he is a Dodger. And I saw people talking about this, and I was like, what are you guys talking about, man? I actually think, and you know what? I'm in the mood to get canceled at the beginning of 2022. I'm ready. You ready for this? Let's do it. I think in a vacuum, it would actually literally make more sense to trade Manny Machado than Jake Cronenworth. I do. It doesn't make sense to trade both of them. Let me be very clear about that, because the Padres are still competitive. They still have a lot of talent on that team. It doesn't make sense to give up. Manny Machado might be a future Hall of Famer, and he's still not too old yet. The only reason is because of the contract. The fact that Manny Machado is owed all that much more money, you would free up a whole lot of salary space, and maybe you can go out and sign somebody else for a lesser contract and then improve areas outside of the rest of the team that ended up collapsing the second half of 2021, obviously, as everybody knows. So I actually think in some ways it would make more sense, because I think you could get a huge return for him. The Yankees have been begging for third base help for a while now. Do you send him there? Do you get yourself a Anthony Volpe and then some pitching depth and maybe some bullpen depth or something like that? Help retool your farm system, give you more assets to then improve the team in other areas. You Darvish, you want to worry about the starting pitching. Mike Clevenger, you still got Mike Clevenger's only on the books for one more year, and then he becomes a free agent. Joe Musgrove, same thing. Maybe you want to re-sign those guys, whatever. You want to have more options. I actually think that would make more sense. You don't have to worry about the contract right now. You wouldn't be saving really all that much if you were to dump Jake Cronenworth. So that and everybody needs to stop it. I know you're bored, but that's crazy to me. It's absolutely crazy. And hopefully this podcast was just a small little example of that. And I'm going to be talking about Jake Cronenworth for a while this offseason, I imagine. I'm probably going to, honestly, I feel like I should reread I should do an entire podcast dedicated to. I thought it was actually pretty good, so I'm going to put that in the description. guys, like I said. But that's basically it, man. That's basically it. Great player, still under in Jake Cronenworth. I do believe that. I do. Underrated. And when you look at some of the other second basemen in the league, like I said, you have Brandon Lau above him. You have Marcus Semien above him. Those guys, great players. They're a little bit. What's the word? There's some other players out there like LeMahieu who are showing you that this second base position can be a little volatile. I mean, DJ LeMahieu all of a sudden is looking like, oh God, like that might be an albatross contract. He was barely hitting the ball well. He might have been a benefitor of the juiced ball. You know what I'm saying? When he had the 26 home runs his first year with the Yankees, and then was incredible for them a year after. Maybe, and now the Yankees are stuck, right? Jose Altuve's not getting any younger, so that's all I'm saying is Jake Cronenworth still underrated, I think, especially when you compare him to the rest of the second baseman in the league since the beginning of 2020. Not that I would take him over everybody, but put some respect on my man's name. Put some respect. I've had enough of this. It's 2022, for Christ's sake. Jake Cronenworth's amazing. But with that all being said, guys, before we close out this podcast, I just want to say one more time, thank you for making Locked On your hashtag first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, guys, hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms. And yes, and before we close it out, I just want to say really quickly, just to preview, we got a lot of good ideas in 2022, guys, and we got a lot of good ideas on the near horizon. Going to be talking with Gabrielle Starr, who used to host Locked On Red Sox, about our favorite baseball written pieces. That should be a fun general baseball talk. We're going to talk about ourselves too. Don't get me wrong. Going to be having Millard Thomas over of Locked On Diamondbacks on the show to talk about trading superstars, which does relate to the Padres. We're going to be talking about that Machado thing that I alluded to earlier. Going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking to Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets about Michael Conforto and whether or not he could be a fit for the Padres. And what else do I got on this whole sheet over here? There's got to be all sorts of stuff. We doing, is that basically it? Let me see here. We're going to be talking more about Manny Machado, movies, fictional baseball players, all that. It's good times. Oh, and also I'm writing over at Just Baseball. Forgot to mention this. Over at Just Baseball, going to be writing about the top 10 plays of the 2021 Padres season and then talking about the article on the podcast. So look forward to that, guys. That's right. Let's party, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all had a great holiday season. And with that all being said, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from: Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Himalaya, Overcast, wherever. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO, Locked On Padres on YouTube, and at LO_Padres for the Twitter account for the show. And until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.